As we mentioned, we're going to be using the Mustache templating framework to do all of our HTML generation from templates given the JSON data from our little Node.js server. I'd like to go ahead and talk a little bit more about the Mustache framework now and how I can use it. And in the previous section, or the previous part, we showed you the Mustache page, the Mustache.js page on GitHub, and it's definitely a great place to browse through the source code. And also here, they've got a great set of documentation which shows you some examples and how to use the framework with a lot of sort of example data that'll show you the resulting output. However, for the purposes of this live lesson, I've gone ahead and written up a quick little Mustache testing little tool here, which has a form where you write some JSON data, which it will go ahead and parse and create an object from, and a Mustache template, which we'll enter here, and then we'll click the render button, and that will generate the resulting output here. The source for this little tester is pretty basic. There's just a bunch of HTML to load in jQuery, which we will use to do our work, the Mustache framework, which will do the rendering, and then actually the sort of the contents of the form and the text areas and everything. But all the key work in the file on the page is done by these 4 simple lines of JavaScript code, which is to get the JSON from the text area and parse it, to get the Mustache template and put that into a variable, and then finally to call mustache.toHTML, which is to render this template given these incoming data. Finally, we take that outputted or that rendered HTML and assign that to our test div. So let's go ahead and spend a little bit of time looking at some examples of how we can actually make this work. Now, it's important to remember that Mustache is not a programming language. It's just a set of rules that control how data are manipulated or massaged for final rendering and output. So let's go ahead and write a very simple little JSON object here with the value name mark. Now, in Mustache, the simplest rule is you give the double brackets on both the sort of opening and closing double brackets, which some people think looks like a mustache, and then the name of a field on that JSON object. So for example here, name. So we can say your name is Mark. And what we do is we take whatever name is in the, we just take the value of this field and replace it here. And you'll see it works like that. If we change this name to Grigori, you'll see there it'll work just fine. Okay, so we can have multiple fields as well. Let's go back to Mark. We can have multiple fields here. We can say your email address is mark1@example.org, like that. And I'm going to be ghetto and just use a break element like that. And I'll say your email is email address, like that. Oops, I actually need to spell everything correctly. Only 2 S's in email address. And there we go. So you can see we can have multiple fields on it, and I can have as much data on my JSON object, and my Mustache can just sort of, my template can just go and pick and choose whatever data it wants to work with and play with things. I can actually also have sort of nested objects. So let's look at the case where I have a user object, and on that user object I have the name and the email address, and I have a comma there, and then I'm also going to have a page lang like that, and that'll be, let's just call it ENUS for now. So now what I'm going to do, oopsie, let's actually keep this because it works just fine. So all I have to do there is just scope it properly here in the sort of the Mustache template. I can still use the username, the user email address. Let's wrap this in a paragraph element for some space, and then your page language is, and then that'll just be page lang like that. And now you'll see it works the same as it did before. I have Mark, I have the email address, and I have the page language, and I can continue to just pick and choose data from the fields from the provided JSON data. So I'd like to look at the case now of what happens when I have an array of data. I'd like to loop over multiple elements. So for example, I have an array of photos here, and they're just going to be called photo1.jpg and photo photo2.jpg, and photo3.jpg, like that. Now, what I can do in Mustache is use something here called a section. And a section is sort of delineated by the hash field name and then the / field name, like that. And now what this says is if that field name is not null, undefined, or false, iterate over each element in that field and iterate this block between these two markers here, one time for each element in that field. So the problem is, you'll see here, I have no file name, I have no field name to refer to these elements in the array. They're just simply strings. They're not objects with values. So Mustache fortunately helps us out and lets us say, well, if you don't actually have a field name, you can just use the dot operator to refer to the thing that is currently being manipulated. So let's turn this into an unsigned list here, like this. And then for each photo in the album, let's go ahead and add a list element, not another unsigned list, like that. Now when I run this, I should see that I get 3 things in a formatted list or something like that, which is really quite nice. What about the scenario, however, when I don't actually have any photos in my album? You'll see here that, as I mentioned before, this section thing says if it is not null, not undefined, for each element in that thing, go ahead and execute this block. Now the problem is there are no elements in this block. There's nothing to do. So fortunately, what I can do is I can use something called the inversion sort of marker here, and it is still delineated by the slash to close it. And now what this says is if there is nothing, if it's kind of the exact opposite of this. This says if there's something to do, if there's values here, execute this block. This says this sort of caret marked inverse block here says if there are no elements to execute, go ahead and do this. So I will say there are no photos. Sorry, like that. Okay, now you'll see that the inverse block is executed because this is indeed empty. So now if I go back here, though, and put photo1.jpg and photo2.jpg back, this block comes up as valid because there is something to execute in there. This block does not come back as valid because there is nothing there. Let's go ahead and add at the top here a number of photos, let's call it. Number of photos. And then I'm going to say photos.length. Again, I can still continue to work with these things as if they're regular objects, like that. And then I'll render that, and you'll see that there are 2 photos. However, what happens if there are no photos anymore? This seems a little silly, like I say that there are 0 photos and then I say, sorry, there are no photos. I really kind of want to get rid of this. It seems a little low rent or something like that. So I need some way to sort of get rid of this block for the case where there are no photos. Now you might be thinking, what happens if I just do this? That actually seems to work. This says if there are any elements in this field, go ahead and execute this code. There aren't, so it won't execute. But let's see what happens when I come back here and actually have a photo again. Is that a dot? I guess it doesn't really matter. It's just a string and photo3.jpg. Okay, now hopefully I didn't make any spelling mistakes. Boom. So I have a problem now. This block now says if this is not null, go ahead and execute this chunk of code once for each element in that block. So I'm going to do this 3 times, once for each thing in this block. So this is a little unfortunate, and this is one thing where this section header thing isn't going to really work for us. So the solution I've been using the most for this is I actually add a new field here called have photos. And for the case where there actually are photos, I will say have photos like this, and oopsie, and then not have photos. Now it'll only execute once because this is just true. If I get rid of these guys and I change this to false, I still get the same effect. So I have to do a little bit of extra work, but I still get I still have the full power of Mustache, and I can still generate some pretty cool HTML from it. So that's an introduction to Mustache. Definitely go back to the GitHub page and play around with the examples and sort of learn a little bit more and sort of think of some real world examples that you're going to use on your web applications. But the next thing we're going to do is take a look at the JavaScript bootstrapper.